Hello, welcome back to Studying Books. I'm Elliot. It's so good to see you again, friends. So today we are talking about what I read in August. I know it's a little bit late. Last week I had to take a small hiatus both from the channel and from reading to move to where I am now, because I'm clearly not in the same place. So I pre-filmed a small clip that I'm gonna send you to now that talks about what I read during the week of the reading. Hello. You've probably already heard from a past version of me. That's why I'm wearing a different colored shirt, look a little different. I have to return some library books today, so I thought that I would quickly run through my reading rush to TBR. We're not gonna go in depth into plots or reviews or anything. We're just gonna say stars, DNFs, why it was starred that way shortly. Like one sentence, sort of short. So let's start with my DNF. I DNF'd to The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. I just wasn't in the mood. I was not in the mood for some fantasy racing. I'm never really in the mood for racing, but was not especially in the mood for it this week. So it was a DNF. Decent book, I think, if I had continued with it. Maggie Stiefvater is hit or miss for me, especially her earlier works. The next book is Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give. I thought it was a phenomenal book. I loved it. I rated it 3 stars, primarily because it's an Own Voices book, and when I don't relate to that author in the same subject that they're talking about, I traditionally rate it 3 stars if I absolutely loved it, or no rating if I felt somewhere in the middle on it, just to either give it the respect of not deflating its rating, or to give it the respect of trying to say not only was this a great book, but it was also worth my time. However, I'm not in a space to judge it in a critical manner. The next book I read was The Dream of the Enlightenment, which is a philosophy book. I read this for The Color of My Birthstone instead of The Scorpio Races. Also, The Hate You Give was for the challenge to read a book from the movie adaptation that you've already watched. This was my birthstone color. I consistently rate this book 4 stars. I think it's a phenomenal look at the history of philosophy. The next book was Akatowicz by Nnedi Okorafor. Dr. Okorafor is a phenomenal writer. I'm actually just about to go get her next book, Akata Warrior. I rated this 4 or 5 stars. I don't remember which one. I'm really quite impressed with her, and I hope that she becomes a new favorite author. And the setting and just the phenomenal nature of the characterization, and I was just a really big fan of that. The next book I read was The Adventure Zone, Pedals to the Metal by Clint McElroy. This is a great book. I mean, this entire series is pretty phenomenal. And I suggest you check it out, either as a podcast or as a graphic novel series. And the next book was The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. I have already moved on to the next book in kind of her career timeline of research, which was I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't. So obviously I really enjoyed this one. I think I rated it 3 or 4 stars. Yeah, it's a good book. It's worth the read. She talks about, living wholeheartedly and how complicated that is, along with, the complications of being people generally. The next and final book that I read was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. It was a good book. It made me cry. Patroclus deserves better, but we all knew that. If you've read the Iliad, you know that Patroclus deserves a lot better than being killed by Hector, but here we are, can't do anything about it. Okie dokie, now back to future me, talking about what I read in the final week of the month. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back to today. We need to talk a little bit about what I read the last week of July. If I'm looking down, I'm looking at my iPad because I don't remember everything I read the last week of July, or like titles and things, because I read a lot. So the first book I read in that last week of July, at the start of this year, I was doing a read-through Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. The previous summer I had finished the Witches series, or the Witches kind of sub-series of that. And then I started in January the Death books, and I got really burnt out on them in late February, so I took like a 4-month break. Cute, right? And then I this summer decided to read the Tiffany Aching books, but in my infinite wisdom I decided to keep them really close together, so I read them in about the course of a week. There we go. So the first book I read was The We Free Men, which is the first book in that series. It introduced you to Tiffany and her brother and sort of the concept of her grandmother, and through the course of the book we meet up with Nanny Ogg and Granny Weatherwax, and eventually later on in the series we see Agnes again, as well as Miss Snitch, who finds young witches and has them trained. Yeah, rated this book 3 out of 5 stars. Very, consummate Pratchett, dry, funny, connected both to Earth and to life. This is one of his later series. It's very much aimed at a middle grade audience, but it's still very rawly Pratchett. Like, he's not censoring himself for younger readers. It just doesn't feel like maybe a Guards or oh gosh, what's the Phantom of the Opera redux that he did? So yeah, the next book I read was Akata Warrior by Dr. Okorafor, which is the sequel to Akata Witch. Good book, rated 4 out of 5 stars. Really liked it. There's something about Dr. Okorafor's writing that just really catches me. I really like her characters, I really like her setting, I really like the way that she writes magic, and the introduction of leopard people in Akata Warrior, or maybe the going in depth of into leopard people in Akata Warrior was really, I found it really interesting, really liked it. Sunny's a really relatable character for young people. Yeah, I really liked it. Now I need to go out and find more African or sci-fi fantasy that's set in Africa, because I think I've fallen in love. The next book I read was A Hatful of Sky. I finished the Tiffany Aching series over the next sort of 5 days. So A Hatful of Sky, Wintersmith, I Shall Wear a Midnight, and The Shepherd's Crown. Those 3 center ones I don't really remember a lot about. Not a huge fan. I didn't even rate I Shall Wear Midnight. So the other 2 had 3 stars, so I assume they were pretty solid Pratchett. Shepherd's Crown comes in at 4 series. I think it is as unfinished as it is. It doesn't fully feel like Terry yet, I think. It is a really phenomenal work for him to go out on. Yeah, it just pulls at my heartstrings. So yeah. And Mr. Pratchett, or Sir Pratchett, wherever you are, know that we miss you. And then the final book I read in July was The Harlem Hellfighters. It is a book about an all-black company in the segregated army during World War I, and them fighting in the trenches, but it sort of finales at their Battle of the Somme. Yeah, it's also just in its own way a phenomenal book. It really, it's very clearly written for an older young adult, sort of adult audience. It is capable of showing the camaraderie of the people that were fighting, as well as the division that racism and Jim Crow sort of brought to the army, and how much harder that made fighting, while also showing the horrors of war and the fight for freedom, and sort of those larger war-lit themed books. It's by Max Brooks. I don't know if it's an Own Voices piece. I really hope that it is, because I really liked that book. If it isn't, feel free to leave it down in the comments. And if you do have an Own Voices piece about segregation in the Army, I would love to read it, love to hear about it. Yeah, I think that war is so terrifying on its own than to have, obviously I have not experienced racism in the same way that a Black, Indigenous, or person of color might, but I just can't imagine how hard that must have been, you know? So if you have time and if you like World War I content, I really do suggest picking up the Harlem Hellfighters. It's a very fun, well, fun's maybe not the right word, but it's a very interesting account of sort of that war, and it puts the African-American lens onto that war and what it was like to fight in that war. So yeah, worth the read, I say. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have had a good summer, and I hope that your transition back to school is safe and easy, especially if you're a younger adult or a teen, or even a child. But if you're a child watching this, please reconsider, because I don't really read child content. Yeah, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below. We will see you all so soon. I love you. Have a wonderful day.